You are listening to an American Free Press podcast.
Joining me on the line is Mark Anderson. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Dave, for Bilderberg 2016.
Here we go. All right, let's see. It started actually today, right? And that's over in Dresden, Germany. Right here in the United States, Eastern Time, it's 2:38 p.m. Central, where I'm at, is 1:38. Where are you? Are you in Central Time as well, Mark?
I'm in Eastern. In Germany, it's probably around 6, 7 o'clock, so they're actually winding up their first day. This year, I took a little bit different tack, along with AFP, to look at their homegrown branches of Bilderberg, including the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, whose meeting on global cities I just attended a few days ago. So we're looking at the outer branches and the network of Bilderberg, even as we look at Bilderberg, which has been my approach all along, and I think it's more effective that way.
Right now in Dresden, Germany, it's 8:39 p.m. It is 6 hours ahead of Eastern Time. Not much in the mainstream media about Bilderberg. There was a piece that I sent around to everybody just a bit ago about a reporter being detained, and the German police had grabbed their cell phones, their computers, and actually just went through it. I guess they don't have the U.S. Constitution, of course, and I guess they could do whatever they want there. Have you ever heard of this particular reporter?
Not that one to link out on, but the ones I know better, like Dan Dix of Press for Truth, who works often with Luke Rutkowski of We Are Change, the American branch of We Are Change, which made its name initially questioning 9/11. I know those guys a lot better, and on the Press for Truth website, it's posted right now, pressfortruth.ca, that Luke and Dan Dix were both detained as well. And Dan Dix says they even came to his hotel room and demanded to look because he didn't have his passport on him when they initially questioned him outside the Hotel Kapinski, and that's the name for short, when they first questioned him there. And according to Dan, him and Luke are not allowed to eat anywhere in the hotel, or they'll reportedly be what they're saying. So this is unusual severity. There's always been how physically close you can get, whether you are or not. But if this is all like we're hearing, and it applies to the press across the board, and not just these guys, I assume, I don't see why they discriminate. But at any rate, if it's that bad, then this is a whole new chapter in limiting the alternative press, whereas the mainstream press, as you indicated, Dave, is so asleep at the wheel that they don't even have to worry about him. And in fact, the mainstream press takes part in Bilderberg without reporting on it, as has been known, the Financial Times and the Economist being two of the steady attendees in terms of mainstream press. So
yeah, they're part and parcel with this whole thing. Let's talk about the participants, the attendees of this year's Bilderberg. Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, Lindsey Graham, the U.S. Senator. Let me note that among elected legislators, American congressmen have been few and far between at Bilderberg in the last 6 or 7 years since I started covering it with Jim Tucker. More and more, it's European and British MPs, members of parliament. Congressmen and senators from America, sitting ones, current ones, are getting there. All of a sudden, Lindsey Graham, yours and mine favorite warmonger, neocon, his name shows up on the list. However, yesterday and today, and I confirmed this with an airtight source, Graham is still in Washington, and he voted as recently as about 2 hours ago on a bill. So there is at least an initial question there as to why his name's on the list, and yet he's here stateside, and what this may suggest. Now, it's possible that he might fly tonight and make the last day and a half or so over in Dresden. He'd have to get moving pretty quick, though, to make 2 full days. And if he doesn't leave by today or tonight, chances are he could only realistically take the tail end of Saturday and maybe 1 full day Sunday. And then you have to wonder why he'd fly all that way for such a small amount of participation. The Senate is in full session today, tomorrow, and Monday. So this is a little odd. The initial hotel where we thought they were going to meet, Westfield's Marriott in Chantilly, Virginia, where they tend to meet on U.S. presidential election years, it is booked up all weekend, and there's no more reservations being taken. I'm not going to jump to conclusions on that, but some of this feeds the ongoing speculation and adds to it that the Bilderberg Group may be having adjunct meetings elsewhere where some people chime in via video conferencing. Maybe they can't all fly to Germany. Of course, why should he list his name and not go there? I don't have all the answers, but for Lindsey Graham to still be in Washington right now, a bit strange, and he is the first sitting elected member of Congress to be there in quite some time, in a while.
Yeah, even though it violates the Logan Act.
Yes, it even violates the Logan Act according to the letter of the law if a private citizen, let's say the head of a corporation, goes and talks to a public official from a European country. Well, what if he's talking about a contract with that company, or with that country, with that MP or with that decision maker from a foreign government?
Yeah, you know what? Country and company, nowadays it's the same thing, so.
Yeah, but I could be the head of a company and go talk to a French minister, a deal that the U.S. government may want to know about before that deal is struck. And if I strike that deal, according to the letter of the law, I've broken the Logan Act.
Right. Now, the list of participants was just recently released on the website, on the official Bilderberg website.
Yes.
Bilderbergmeetings.org. What happened was that, I don't know if there's a lot of people accessing their website, but if you try to access that, bilderbergmeetings.org/participants.html, nothing comes up. It says method not implemented. So you can't get it. I don't know if they took it down, like I said, or if it's just too many people trying to figure out who's going there. Do you have any idea about the participants?
Certainly, I look at some more than others. It's about 130 this year. I noticed, first of all, let me say that too is unusual, besides this question, and besides the press being treated more rudely than ever before, especially the alternative press. It's unusual for that website not to work, because that website first popped up about 7-8 years ago when all the pressure from the media that Jim Tucker helped stirred up, along with my help a little later on, finally forced these guys, well, okay, we won't do a press conference, but we'll put out some generic press release with a list of participants and our topics. I love some of their topics, don't you? Current events.
Yeah.
Russia, China. That'd be like saying the weather. Let's discuss the weather. But yeah, this is unusual too for that website not to work. If they're going to be quasi-open due to past pressure, why would there be a limit on it? I suppose it could be the web traffic, but that doesn't really seem to add up. I myself have not had any trouble thus far, but I did not try and call that list up today. I saved it into a Word file. But without going any further on that, Vernon Jordan, a good friend of the Clintons, is also on there. Now, Vernon hasn't been there quite some time, but he was there in 1991 in Germany, in Baden-Baden, which is a few hours away from Dresden. That's the time that Bill Clinton was there right before he became president. And he came there to Baden-Baden really with the direct assistance of Vernon Jordan, who happens to be one of the few, if only black members of Bilderberg. He's an attorney by trade, I believe. Very close friend of the Clintons, Bill and Hillary. And Hillary was at Bilderberg in 1997, as I reported recently in AFP. So besides Lindsey Graham, Vernon Jordan's very curious. It'd be nice to get a visual confirmation of whether he and Graham, either or both, actually in Germany, or if it's possible that they might be participating but not necessarily showing up at the same place. The bias toward Hillary Clinton is pretty strong. It's a very anti-populist group, Bilderberg, and their branches in the U.S., such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Chicago Global Affairs Council, are also extremely anti-populist, and therefore they talk about Donald Trump like he's the plague. Vernon Jordan's presence there does suggest the Hillary Clinton element in all of this, that she would be the preferred presidential torch carrier. Certainly, I need to go over the list and look at the background of some of the more obscure people. Henry Kissinger has returned. The fact that he even has a pulse is something of a miracle.
Well, we don't know if he has a pulse. We haven't met him. He might have died a while ago, him and Rockefeller, and they might be like the undead or some kind of vampires, because that's what they really look like that, don't they?
Yeah, kind of hologrammatic ghouls, in lack of a better description. I'm looking at also the possibility of some very large protests, but these crackdowns are probably meant to try and discourage that on the reporters. I'm told by Alexander Benesch, who runs a web TV show there, I was interviewed by him earlier, that in Dresden they could several thousand left-wing and right-wing protesters at virtually a moment's notice. I don't have any solid evidence that that's happening as day one draws to a close, but the tentative expectation is several hundred, if not thousands of protesters. The potential is certainly there, and it'll be interesting to see whether this cracking down will discourage that or not. On the flip side, there's not nearly as many police there as compared to last year in Telfs, Austria, where they had far more police, and yet they were in a much more secluded, barricaded area behind dense woods atop a high mountain in western Austria. So they're out in the open in this urban area, and yet there's a lot fewer police. So at least so far, that suggests they're not ready for a big, huge protest. But of course, that could change as the weekend comes. And as we've reported on AFP's website, AmericanFreePress.net, they announced Dresden significantly earlier in the game than they normally would reveal such things, right after we thought they were meeting in Virginia. This led to speculation by my German contact, Alexander, as well. Is Dresden all where it's at, or is this sort of a multifaceted thing going on? And Lindsey Graham may provide the key. We'll see whether he's in session tomorrow with the rest of the Senate or whether he'll go on a foreign junket. And by law, they're supposed to reveal when congressmen use taxpayer dollars to go overseas. So
Yeah, that law is for us. We have our law,
yeah.
they have their law. Let me just say before we continue that if any of the listeners want to beef up on Bilderberg, the history of it, the place to go, of course, is AmericanFreePress.net with the American Free Press bookstore. You can go in there, and you mentioned him before, Jim Tucker. He's a legend now. And Jim Tucker wrote Jim Tucker's Bilderberg Diary. So that's available in regular old book form or PDF. So check that out. You can go to AmericanFreePress.net, click on the store tab, and it's right there. Or any of the articles that we have in the slideshow on Bilderberg should be linked there.
The current article I have on there gets into some of the recent developments with Bilderberg's links with Brexit. That's the upcoming June 23rd vote by the UK, whether they want to leave the EU, as well as the long-sought Bilderberg-linked goal of creating an EU army for the United States of Europe that was envisioned when the CIA and the Ford Foundation helped fund the first Bilderberg meetings as part of the European consolidation movement in the early 1950s. Much of that is alluded to in my current posting once it gets past the initial points of announcing the meeting. So that's on AmericanFreePress.net right now, along with connections to world taxation by Bilderberg in tune and in concert with the G7 and the G20 and these trade deals, the transatlantic and trans-Pacific trade deals. So all of that I've reported is currently on there now. The world taxation thing especially carries over from Tucker's work. And also, Dave, you might want to ask me about the Chicago Global Affairs Council that I just covered in person recently and the linkages there.
That would be good. Yeah, let's go into that.
Yeah, Bilderberg being arguably the most secretive and the smallest and the most exclusive of this network. The spokes going into that hub of Bilderberg include the Trilateral Commission, of course, the Council on Foreign Relations, but the CFR founded in 1921. 1 year later, the Chicago CFR was founded in 1922. Eventually, probably to get rid of the stain of that CFR name, they changed it to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Well, the main steady media participant in Bilderberg, the City of London-based Financial Times, conducted in conjunction with the Chicago Council the Global Cities Forum 1st through 3rd. I was there June 2nd. I was right there among them. I had lunch when they had lunch, where they had lunch. It was held at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was an open forum, but as you know, Dave, they speak globalese. They speak for people at two levels. And one of the things, and my German friend and I were looking at this, there's an Italian delegate there, I don't have his name right in front of me, who's in Dresden at Bilderberg now, who's into this idea of global cities. And at the Chicago Forum on Global Cities, again, Bilderberg-related Financial Times helped put it on, they talk about the idea that cities, LA, New York, Chicago, Paris, London, and so on, can reach some kind of global standard in terms of their diversity, integration, infrastructure, public transport, economic structure. It almost reminds me of when they talk about products, ISO 9000 or whatever it is, that a product reaches some kind of global standard. And well, apparently cities, according to these double domes, can have global standards. One wouldn't really think of a city as a global thing, really, not in the literal sense. A city is a municipality within a county, which is within a state, which is within a nation, right? Well, they're looking at these criteria, some of them quite nebulous, and they have to fight global warming every step of the way. But these criteria make cities, quote unquote, qualify to be global, and they connect these cities in kind of a grid. And in a sense, they bypass the idea of a nation. So these cities become not really capitals or cities of their home country, but of the global grid. So you can see how they discuss an idea in one forum and take it over with a delegate to the next. This is how it works. This is why I call Bilderberg private government. They're like a neoliberal capitalist Politburo, and they take ideas cooked up at these other think tanks, they refine it and discuss it, and becomes policy through direct or indirect means. That's what they're up to, and this global cities thing is something of an exclusive for AFP, and I think it's the newest, freshest, most interesting thing out there right now.
Mm-hmm. And when you were in Chicago, which I've been to many times, I haven't been there in a while, know some people refer to it as Chicago now. How was it? Is Chicago a more appropriate name for it, or is that kind of going overboard?
Maybe a tad overboard. I took the train right to the Loop, and that goes right next to the Art Institute. So you're right in the heart of the Loop, and so it's pretty cosmopolitan. It wouldn't really dovetail with that label. So this was in conjunction with ongoing meetings of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the former Chicago CFR, and they have been in operation since 1922, and they are arguably the busiest of these World Affairs Councils, and incidentally, there are over 60 of these World Affairs Councils operating in the U.S., and I think I've mentioned this, under the umbrella of the World Affairs Council of America, or WACA. So you could say that the Bilderberg philosophy has 60 branches in the U.S., 60.
Wow.
That's what happens when you have a lot of money and all the time in the world. So Bilderberg is kind of where I think they put the final bow around the package, but they cook these things up at these different think tanks and at the World Economic Forum, and many of which are open to the public. And I'm not even saying all the people are evil or bad.
Right.
And not all the people have bad ideas. I think some of them are genuinely concerned for the world, but it's kind of like masonry high enough to really have these things happen. And so a lot of them I think are just idealistic, but the ones that really make things happen are more like the Kissingers of the world. They're more the insider track, the core group, you might say.
Right.
And they're the ones that make the final call, I think.
The vampires.
What will become policy, who will be the next minister of this or minister of that. They may not always get their way, but this is the way it works. So while we have a regular government, you've got these World Affairs Councils and these committees meeting in parallel in a government all their own.
Like a star chamber.
It is, except star chambers are normally seen as judicial. It's taken them decades, but that's what it's all about.
But they're there. Let's take a look at the final list of the participants. You've got the chairman and CEO of AXA Group, Henri de Castries. And then you've got the mayor of the city of Rotterdam, Ahmed Abu Talab. And then you've got a banker from Germany. You've got basically the Secretary of Defense there in Denmark. Former Minister of Finance, MP, Social Democratic Party, PRT, that must be Portugal. From Spain, the executive chairman and CEO of Telefonica, which is a huge telecommunication, biggest one in Spain. Then you've got Roger Altman. He's well known here in the United States. Now he's the executive chairman of Evercore. Then you've got Sam Altman. I don't know if he's related to Roger Altman. Then you've got Minister of Finance for SWE. I imagine that must be Sweden. Magdalena Andersson. No relation to you because there's two S's. Or there might be. You never know. Then you've got one of our friends from the mainstream media here, columnist from Washington Post, Ann Applebaum. It goes on and on. I mean, come on. Can it be any more obvious? I mean, you've got the biggest of the biggest, the worst of the worst, and you've got the mainstream media rubbing shoulders and elbows and whatever else with these people that they're supposed to be covering. They're supposed to be on their asses to find out what they're doing wrong.
It breaks the cardinal rule of journalism to participate with decision makers as opposed to be separate and report on them. You cannot break a rule in a more fundamental way in journalism than that. They're not even journalists, they're just publicists.
Exactly. They're not journalists. It's a disgrace. Was it always like this in this country? Is this something new? It seems like it always was like this. It's just that now with the internet and basically people being able to peer into just about everything, and Bilderberg now, as you said, shutting down. Maybe that's why they had it in Germany, because they don't have the Constitution there. You can't really do the things that here in the United States, if it was over at that one resort that you mentioned.
Chantilly, yeah.
Chantilly. I've been there. I've been to that resort. When I was in the area, I drove around and visited it. It's in a weird location. You know, you wouldn't expect something like that to be in a residential and industrial area, of course, off the beaten path. It's kind of interesting that they set it up in Dresden knowing that they don't have these civil protections there that they do here, and the cops can just grab you and open up your... I mean, almost like the Nazis were supposed to be like, right? I mean, aren't we supposed to be in like a different era here?
Well, if you listen to these EU boosters that don't want Britain to leave talk about the EU in such glowing terms, we're all supposed to have a never-ending nirvana of democracy, freedom, open borders, and live happily ever after. It never turns out quite the way they say, and one of the characteristics of all these think tanks, including Bilderberg, is they always act like most of these trends are the inexorable forces of nature, that this is just the way things are going, but they're specifically and tangibly pushing things this direction. information. They're presetting the dials, and then they turn around and act like they have nothing to do with the outcome.
Yeah, right.
You cannot be serious.
They are.
Exactly. And they have an almost religious belief in man-made global warming, as if there could be no other explanation for climate change such as it is, if it even really exists in any measurable, ongoing way. I looked up my list while you were talking. You have Helen Goodman, a member of the Labour Party, British MP. You have a member of the European Parliament, Sylvie Goulard, and then Lindsey Graham. There he is, the only U.S. congressman to be there, a sitting congressman in quite some time, as I mentioned earlier. One thing about Bilderberg I've noticed is it's taking on more and more of a corporate character. There are fewer and fewer government people there, although the ones that are there tend to be very key, but it's more and more of high-tech corporations and academics. And these bought-off journalists such as John Micklethwaite, editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, and of course Martin Wolf, the fixture of Bilderberg from the City of London Rothschild-connected Financial Times, and Klaus Schwab, head of the World Economic Forum, who I wrote about recently for AFP back in February when the World Economic Forum met. And again, they made these same kind of global cities predictions. The 2/3 of the population will be living in cities by 2050. That could connect to Agenda 21, which basically declares the countryside off limits to most human, as we know. So they're rezoning the globe to a global city-based grid, and this is being bared out not just through Bilderberg, but again through the Chicago group. This is what they're up to remake the world based on a city-state or city-based foundation. And this is what they're doing. There's no other way of putting it. Eric Schmidt, incidentally, who's been chairman of Google for a long time, has now converted that into Alphabet Incorporated. He's there again. That's like his 6th year in a row or so, give or take.
Yeah, I remember Schmidt when he was nothing really, when he was the head of this Novell Corporation, which was, I think, consumed or collapsed before the big tech bubble, the internet bubble. I mean, yeah, he's a bright guy and everything, but I'm sorry, these people are just evil. They can't be trusted. They just can't be trusted. They're behind closed doors, they're sneaking around, and they're violating people's rights by not allowing them to cover. I mean, what's the harm in letting a journalist outside of this fancy hotel take notes? Who are they hurting, right?
Well, their claim, as you know, and as many know, that they want to be able to feel like they can speak openly without thinking it's recorded. But you'll notice the verbal gymnastics involved. They'll say, we don't keep any records and no resolutions are raised or forwarded or voted upon. But if you don't keep any records, then you don't know what was raised or voted upon. See, it's a catch-22. So on the one hand, they'll say anything wrong, but we don't keep any record of the meeting. You don't know if anything done was wrong, right, or indifferent.
Well, how stupid is that? If you're going there spending all this money to go over important stuff, why would you not keep records of the meeting? Is that like the dumbest thing in the world? Right there, they're lying to you, openly.
They put their pants on, apparently, like everyone else. And you and I both know that when you discuss multiple topics or you go over detailed things, somebody has to record something in written or audio form. You got to have some notion of what was said. It's a bunch of verbal gymnastics and psychological hocus pocus. One of the things that popped up this year on the 10 topics, which is fewer topics than usual, usually they're up between 14 and say 17 topics, was precariat and middle class. Now, precariat, P-R-E-R-I-A-T, is defined as a social class formed by people suffering from precarity, which is a condition of existence without predictability, without security, affecting their material or social welfare, as well as being a member of the proletariat class of industrial workers who lack their production and hence sell their labor in order to live. So they're discussing the pure concept, the precariat in the middle class. But their trade deals are the primary reason we have such a thing as a precariat.
Of course.
So, once again, it's this hubris, this noblesse oblige. I'm rich and I'm fit to lead and privileged to be here. I must be smart because I'm rich, and I'm rich because I'm smart. And it's the ultimate human hubris that's involved here. They don't see their own folly. And that's why, even if their intentions are good, that's why they're dangerous. They don't see their own folly.
Yeah, well, they're going to see it when hunger marches start again, because something's about to happen. I can feel it. There's too much going on now, and it's not good. Something will happen, and I think these criminals are going to be behind it.
That's probably true. A lot of them want to live long enough to see the fruits of their illicit labors. And we can go into more on the next podcast and some more details about the here and now, as well as more background that's helpful. And I'll be checking more of the various branches, the spokes that go to the hub here. And we'll have more next time, Dave. But I think this is a good wrap up for today.
Excellent.
About some of what they're talking about and some of the people who are there, the riddle of Lindsey Graham, the ongoing things like their EU army and their trade deals and their Brexit. One last thing I'll add is that as the guys at the ukcolumn.org also figured out along with me, the Brexit thing appears to be something of a psyop. In other words, even if the people in Britain and the UK vote to leave the European Union, it doesn't appear that they'll actually ever quite get out of it. If for no other reason than if there is an EU army created, Britain is already a part of that, and they leave the EU if British forces are part of an EU army.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because today is what, the 9th, so you're talking 2 weeks away?
Yes, exactly 2 weeks away they'll have the Brexit vote.
I don't think that they're going to, first of all, I don't trust any of these votes to begin with, but I don't think they're going to vote to leave. Even if it is close or however they do it, they'll rig it, but I think they're just going to shove it in our face and say, no, they want to be in this union. This is a great thing here. I mean, you can't beat it. But we'll see. And of course, we'll talk about that as the time comes up. And see, you didn't even have to be there in Dresden. It's a good thing you weren't in Dresden, because they probably manhandle you like they did. Didn't they do that at the last one? They threw you out of the hotel?
That's a funny little memory. But yeah, this Jawohl, the Commandant, this hotel owner, screams as if I were a private and he were a general, dressing me down for misbehaving, maybe while on leave from the army base. It was funny. And then my friend Carter Osmar from here in Lansing, Michigan, he had a room booked there already. They put him and his suitcases right on the curb, threw him out too, and he already booked a room, going to spend money there. So once they dispensed with me, they dispensed with Carter, who's as harmless as a fly. And it just shows that if they're darn innocent in their humanitarian ways, why would they do that to me and other people last year and treat the reporters the way they are this year? It's not just because some royalty is there. It's way beyond that.
Yeah, and did they give him his money back at least for his room?
I believe so. I never actually asked him that, but they've really gotten nervous about alternative press in the last 2 to 3 years, and maybe it is providential just this one time. There's a lot of things lacking by not being there, particularly getting more other people knowledgeable, because that's what I do mostly when I'm there, among other things, is get the word out to the regular people in the greater part of the town. Plaster it with copies of AFP and get more of the non-plugged in people plugged in. That's one of the many reasons to actually be there, plus to verify the veracity of so many things you hear online, which you can't all believe, and also to verify visually who's there and compare it to the list.
Right.
I like to do that through other parties. I like to do that directly, but we'll just do the best we can, hopefully make it back next year, or maybe they'll meet in the States next year. So we'll talk to you next time on the next podcast, Dave. Quite soon, I hope so.
Yes, that'll be good. Let me know, and we'll get the news out to the listeners. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks.